The most dangerous phase of your career is not when you're failing, it's immediately after you have succeeded. The behaviors that secured your last promotion are the exact mechanisms that will prevent your next one. We call these habits, but they really are obsolete survival strategies. The system rewards these survival strategies that may have served you in the past, but they move on to become your liabilities. Today, I'm going to talk about the 5 specific behaviors that you might feel they are strengths, but the executive marketplace will see them as liabilities. I recently ran a poll on YouTube and LinkedIn asking you what your biggest struggles were when it comes to getting a promotion. More than half of you said that it was communicating your value. Some of you said that it was gaining access to senior decision-making rooms, and some of you said it was demonstrating business acumen. But you see, all of these responses to the poll, these votes, point to something is missing. But I submit to you that it's really not about something that you lack. They are about your habits. So let's dive into the 5 habits, which really are adoptive strategies that have outlived their purpose. Once you see them, you can stop confusing them for professionalism. Let's dive in. Habit number 1 is confusing being needed with being valuable. See, early in our careers, being valuable really was being needed. And this is where your value was tied to operational competence. You were the one that was valuable if you knew all the details of the work, if you were the one that could fix the bugs, if you were the go-to person that people could run to, if there was a problem, if there was something that needed fixing right now, or to understand what was really going on out into the field. And you see, after a while operating like this, we begin to become addicted to this dopamine hit when we do the work. At the executive level, there's a threshold when you cross the line into higher strategic business acumen that requires a different modality of operating. And at this level, if you are still addicted to that dopamine hit and you are the one with operational excellence, you could be the one who comes in and tries to help your team every time they need you to fix a problem. And it might feel like you are helping them and demonstrating leadership. But at the executive level, what that signals is that you haven't really scaled your excellence. In other words, you are demonstrating a failure of elevation, because every hour that you spend on your personal productivity is an hour that you steal away from vision. And this is important because at the executive level, if you are still the person who goes into the weeds, then it really reads as an inability to govern. And this is why it's important that when you're at the strategic level, the success of that level means that the system operates without your constant presence. If you're the smartest person in all the technical details, then you're failing your strategic mandate. And this is really a shift in mindset. Number 1, it does feel great to be needed by your teams, to be needed to fix a problem, to put out the fire. But at some point, there's a threshold that you reach when you're growing in your career, when you're growing in your role, and especially if you have an aim or a goal to be in the executive team. At some point, your necessity, your function is not in your personal productivity, but it is in your contribution to the vision. And this requires a higher altitude of thinking at the level of strategy. So if your busyness and your identity is tied to being needed at the operational level, then you won't have the bandwidth or the time or the resources or the focus to be able to spend on strategic thinking. And this can be a limitation of your growth, especially a limitation of how you can create more value or leverage your value if most of your resources and your time is spent in operations. Habit number 2 is cynical defensiveness. We've all been in this position before where we've been burned in the past. You know, like a boss takes credit for your work, or a peer throws you under the bus, or maybe you've been laid off even though you were a top performer. And these things really do create trauma and hurt. And as a result of that, we build up this psychological armor to protect ourselves from future hurt or prevent this from happening again. Now, we might not call it that, but we definitely give it a euphemism and we call it, well, I'm just learning from experience. However, nature shows us that this form of self-protection is really a loss of function. Let me give you an analogy. Let's say that you injure yourself by accident and you might have injured a muscle or some other deep tissue. As a result, your body rushes in to heal it. And it heals it by filling in those gaps from the injury with collagen. That process is called fibrosis, which is the formation of scar tissue. The problem is scar tissue is less flexible. It has less elasticity. There's not as much blood supply as the original tissue. And as a result of that, the tissue is different from it was before it was injured. Now, if fibrosis occurred in vital organs like your heart or your liver, then it can be really dangerous because the heart and the organ doesn't really function properly because the elasticity is missing. It doesn't stretch and there's lack of a blood supply. And as a result of that, fibrosis leads to a lack of function. Well, your professional scars behave very similar to fibrosis. For example, because you were betrayed once, you might now choose to withhold information, and that creates greater rigidity. Or perhaps once you were criticized unfairly, so now you choose to really scrutinize and document everything that was said, and that creates a loss of speed, motion, right? Or maybe because you were thrown under the bus and you were passed over, now you might have a hesitation to mentor other people, which now creates a loss of circulation, right? You don't circulate your knowledge, you don't circulate your experience. So as a result of that, you may have survived the injury, but it's definitely a loss of function. Executive leadership requires elasticity, which is the ability to pivot, to adopt, to really have resilience, to absorb impact without shattering. And the thing is, if you hold on to your past hurts, even though they are traumatic, I'm not diminishing that. If you hold on to your past hurts, though, it really creates a degree of brittleness and a degree also of cynicism. Let me walk through how I coach my clients to break through those past hurts to regain the functional alignment required to lead. The first step is to really break down that scar tissue. It is to understand the triggers that it is still having, the effects that it is still having on you and your decisions currently, and to really neutralize the emotional triggers and the emotional perspectives that are still tied there. The next step is to be able to see how those past traumas have affected you and to be able to reverse those behaviors and neutralize those behaviors. So moving forward, they no longer trigger you and they no longer shape how you make decisions and what you decide to do moving forward. And then once that is neutralized and dissolved, the next step then is to regain and build the functional requirements to lead. And these include developing the leadership skills, developing the acumen to really communicate, and developing that emotional resilience so that when criticism does come and feedback does come, that it really doesn't mean that it attacks you and it doesn't have that same effect on you that it did before. And the whole step, the whole process is for you to be able to have that self-confidence and for that confidence to come from the inside out, not from the outside in. So this is the overarching steps that I walk my clients through, and you can choose to develop each of these steps for yourself, or you can choose to work with me and my team. If you choose to work with me directly and my team directly to help you through these steps, then I advise you to click the link below, the first link, to talk to one of my trusted career advisors. And if it's the right fit for us to work together, then you'll be invited into my mentorship, where my team and I will work closely with you to develop that leadership alignment. And if that is you, then I look forward to meeting you and working with you on the inside. Habit number 3 is analysis paralysis masquerading as due diligence. At the mid-level roles at that career stage, we are paid for precision. Your role is to ensure that the data is as close to 100% as possible. It is to ensure that things are moving forward smoothly and that there is a certain degree of certainty before you act. Now, this works at that level because at that level, most problems are pretty well defined, right? There are clear goals, there are clear constraints, they are more well defined, and there's a clear set of variables. Executive leadership operates in the realm of probability, not certainty. Because at this level, if you wait until you are close as possible to 100% certainty, then you already missed the market opportunity. And that's because at the executive level, most problems are ill-defined. In other words, timelines are competing, there are conflicting objectives, and data is largely incomplete. The sabotaging habit here is analysis paralysis masquerading as due diligence. You might believe that you're being thorough and prudent, but as a result of your actions, waiting until you have more information or 100 or as close to 100% accuracy, waiting for that really does appear as being slow and risk averse. So the strategy here is to shift from accuracy to directional clarity. Because at the executive level, in fact, the higher you climb vertically, the more decisions you will need to make with less and less information. So it's really important to embrace and actually be quite comfortable making decisions with quite incomplete information. So like knowing only 60% of the information or 40% of the information and still being decisive. This shift is not only a mindset shift, but a skill set as well in decisiveness. Habit number 4 is the savior complex. Many professionals have climbed the ladder by being the fixer. Whenever there is a fire, they come in and extinguish it. Whenever a team member needs help, they go in and save them. Now, they've built a reputation around being indispensable in that way. While that is prudent and it serves and is valuable at a certain level, it creates a ceiling on your scalability. By constantly intervening when a team member needs saving or when you need to pick up the slack, you atrophy their development and you create a dependency on your presence. And as a result of that, you could become the bottleneck of the entire division. So you see, success in a system, in the ecosystem of the business, doesn't require a hero. In fact, it means building ecosystems that doesn't require a hero. So if you are desiring to scale yourself and move away from personal productivity so that you can have the bandwidth, the energy, the resources, the focus on higher level strategy, it's important to build this ecosystem. And it's important to understand how to motivate your teams so that they can operate without you. If the team collapses every time you step away, you have not built a team, you've built a following. So the goal is to move away from solving problems directly yourself and move towards building ecosystems where problems can be solved at the lowest possible level. Habit number 5 is seeking consensus through validation. There's a lot of unwritten rules out there that says that you need to seek consensus, to be liked by the majority, and to be able to keep the peace. And as a result of that assumption, there is often a perspective that if you ever encounter conflict or friction in a workplace relationship, that is an indication of a failure in leadership. And it's unfortunate because at the executive level, seeking consensus through validation is really the fastest path to becoming irrelevant. Now, I've said this before and I'll say it again. As you move up vertically, you will be making more and more decisions with less and less information. And these high-value decisions almost always will come with trade-offs that will upset a portion of the whole organization. So if your personal habit is to seek consensus, 100% agreement before you move forward, then it may be a while before you move forward. And for sure, you're going to be settling for the common denominator of mediocrity. And besides, consensus is one type of leadership style, and that leadership style is not always appropriate. It depends on the situation and the maturity of your business and the company that you're working for. For example, let's say that you're working for a business that's growing rapidly. And what happens when there's rapid growth? There's risks that we need to take. We need to move and pivot fast because we're in a fast-paced industry. Or sometimes when companies are growing fast, they can encounter a crisis. And if the only leadership style you know is to seek consensus, well, consensus takes a lot of time. Consensus means that you have a lot of resources going in to get buy-in, and that takes a lot of time. So you can see how when a company is in a crisis situation, or the situation is we need to pivot fast, then seeking consensus is not your best strategy. And it's going to really it's going to hold back the decisions we need to make right now. Besides, you're not there to be validated by the group. You're there to protect the future of the entity and its sustainable growth. And that requires benevolent friction, which means that it would be wise for you to be willing to endure the discomfort of being misunderstood or being criticized in the short term so that you can protect the viability of the organization in the long term. Stop seeking consensus. Look for the truth. The habits that got you to the middle were heavy. They were protective shells, addiction to details, and a craving for validation. To rise to your next level, before you start adding new skills to your backpack, it will be wise to first unlearn the old survival habits. And that way, you can take on the executive identity. Because you see, growth is a subjective process. It is about shedding the weight of that old identity and then leaning into the risk so that you can step into the ring and lead from the front, not in the weeds.